Live on Live.
My special guest on Paris Live today is Nicholas Norbrook. He's the managing editor of the Africa Report, one of our regular visitors here in the studio. Welcome to the program, Nick. Thanks for finding time. I know you're a little bit on deadline.
It is press day. Everything is now with the printer. The world is at peace.
You can take a deep breath. Now, we've got two main subjects to discuss today. The first one is the crisis in Sudan. Protest leaders have turned down an offer by the ruling military council for talks. It's been going backwards and forwards. They're calling for justice after Monday's crackdown that doctors have said has left up to 100 people dead. But the Sudanese Health Ministry seem to be lowering that number and saying around 46. There have been protests for the last 6 months. They've led up to the military ousting of President Omar al-Bashir in April. And it looks like protesters are still calling for the generals to hand over control to a civilian government. And the most recent article you published is to focus on one of the key figures in this revolution, if we can call it that, is the General Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo. I'm not sure if I pronounced his name correctly. He's known as Hemeti. Maybe we could begin there with who is Hemeti. He's got a nickname, the Butcher of the Revolution, in your article. That gives us a little bit of an indication as to his reputation.
So he heads up a military force. There are now several military forces within Sudan. You have the classic army, you have the intelligence services, and you have the rapid support forces, the RSF, which are run by this general known as Hemeti. He is perhaps better known in Sudan for having been instrumental in putting down the uprising in Darfur in incredibly brutal fashion. The Janjaweed militia were reorganized. He ran essentially. He sort of hauled himself over several bodies to the top of the Janjaweed militia, and they were reorganized by Omar al-Bashir, the now former president, into the RSF. But they are essentially Hemeti's boys, and there are now 9,000 of them in the capital, Khartoum. And what they did over the last few days was to bring the tactics of Darfur, the rape, the beatings, the murder that was so commonplace in Darfur. They've taken these tactics right into the heart of the capital city. And it's important to point out that there is widespread revulsion within Khartoum for what has happened. And when we saw, I think in the last 24 hours, even Saudi Arabia and the Saudis have been backing Hemeti because Hemeti's been very useful, helping them prosecute their war in Yemen. But even Saudi Arabia in the last 24 hours has expressed its concern about what's happening in Khartoum. So that is, I hope, significant. But here's the problem. Hemeti, you can't have him there and you can't not have him there. If you were to try and take him out by force, you would cause a civil war because he's got very powerful backing from within and from without the country. At the same time, if he was to stay, essentially in charge of the military, there is the number one in the military council, a colleague of his who also helps the Gulf prosecute their war in Yemen. But he's essentially the man in charge. If he stays, then the protests will not stop. So we're in an extremely, extremely difficult situation in Sudan. And, the very latest that we hear is that there are big chunks of the military who are hostile to, I can't express enough the revulsion that's felt in Khartoum against what's going on. Junior officers also incredibly upset. The chances of a potential rift in the military, the chances of another coup, without wanting to overstate these things, they are very, very high right now.
So this so-called Transitional Military Council backtracked a little bit in the last couple of days, and maybe under pressure from Saudi Arabia or the UAE, said, okay, we will negotiate. But the protesters are really, as you said, they're very, very angry and very unhappy. So it looks like this is a dead end for any form of peace talks.
Well, the protesters have said They've called for another general strike that will happen this weekend. That will no doubt be a call that is followed. Just today, a few hours ago, the African Union put out a pronouncement saying they were suspending Sudan from the organization. So there is now a ratcheting up of the diplomatic pressure as well. Whether that mixture of diplomatic and civilian pressure and perhaps pressure from, the guys funding Khartoum, perhaps that will move something. Again, perhaps. When you have President Trump good buddies with the ruler of the Gulf, the UAE rather, and also with Mohammed, with MBZ in Saudi Arabia, who knows?
And staying with this idea of kind of pressure, the European Union, I guess, we're wondering what is the European Union's stance on this whole thing. And it's a little bit difficult to know how European countries for sure would be saying we're against this ongoing violence, and they've issued statements and so on. But it seems that in your article, you're raising the point that Hemeti is kind of a key player when it comes to negotiating with Europe in terms of this question of migrants, a migrant flow, and he may well be a key person, a key negotiator.
Well, he's managed to make himself essential to lots of different constituencies, Hemeti. And as you say, the relationship with Europe is a particularly complicated one, and I think plenty of European chancelleries have expressed outrage and shock, and plenty of them have, I don't know if relied is the right word, but they've certainly transacted with Hemeti in terms of stopping migrants, from Eritrea, from elsewhere, transiting through Khartoum, Sudanese migrants, or on their way to Europe. And the European Union has these deals with a number of countries in Africa to try and stem the flow of migrants. And these, I think, cause very uncomfortable questions for European politicians, especially at the moment when the national question, these ideas of immigration, etc., have torn Europe apart over the last 4 or 5 years.
Exactly. Now, moving on to another feature that you're going to be publishing in the Africa Report. It's called Fraternal Foes. It pertains to the very strained relationship between Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni and Rwanda's leader Paul Kagame. Why did you choose to focus on these two rivals who actually used to be allies?
Well, I mean, there has been over the last month increasing tension at the border between Uganda and Rwanda. There have been shootings just a week or so ago. Someone was shot dead. And it stems perhaps over their relationship, the degrading of their relationship, but also, the interests, the mining interests that both Rwanda and Uganda have in the Democratic Republic of Congo. They made common cause to kick out the Congolese president in the 1990s, Rwanda and Uganda, and then fell out, many believe squabbling over who should control what mineral rights. The amount of gold exported from Uganda has gone up by an incredible amount. I think just a decade ago, there's about $10 million worth of gold exported out of Uganda. And now, every time customs checks bags coming out of the country, they'll find a gold bar in the carry-on luggage. They're now exporting over $500 million worth of gold a year in Uganda. And Uganda doesn't really mine much gold. So it's coming from somewhere. It's coming from the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, recently in March, the new president of Congo, Felix Tshisekedi, came over to Kigali. We were having our Africa CEO Forum, which our company does, and he spoke, and there were very emollient words between the president of Congo and the president of Rwanda, perhaps showing that there's been some new diplomatic alignments. The militias between Congo and Rwanda are supposed to be dying down in their intensity. And people wonder whether Uganda is bothered by that. Are they seeing their rival, Rwanda, taking up a more strategic position of influence in the Congo? So, we wanted to unpick these big economic, political issues, but also there's a personal story here. President Kagame, was the intelligence chief of Museveni and helped him topple Milton Obote, a long time ago. So they work together. They have a history of toppling tyrants, and they know each other very well. Perhaps family feuds are the most explosive.
Indeed. And what's interesting is that the article has interviews that were done, if I've understood correctly, face to face with these gentlemen.
Yes.
So these are interviews that were done in person and gathering the material for the interview. How hard was it to go about getting those interviews? Were there conditions posed upon you or censored? Or
No. I mean,
did they speak freely?
On my leg of the reporting, I sat down with President Kagame, with Patrick Smith, our editor-in-chief, and we had an extremely frank 3-hour discussion, which, at one point almost resulted in us having to end the interview. I jest, but things got heated. And funny story, after we finished the interview, we were getting the lift to go back down. The interview was held in the Ministry of Defense, so we were surrounded by soldiers. And when we got in the lift, it started normally, and then it suddenly stopped, and the power went out, and the light went out. And I thought perhaps we pushed it a bit far with the question, but everything went fine. We got our plane, no problem.
Okay. So, and just very quickly to wrap up, both of these leaders are very keen on staying in power. They've put into place mechanisms. So they're looking really at the long picture. So they're also looking at themselves as guarantors of the security in the region. So we might be seeing these two fellows around for much longer.
Well, time has a natural limit for man. And I think, the red card will be pulled out for Museveni sooner rather than later. He's a good bit older than President Kagame. We asked Kagame about succession plans. He said, they've got a very deep bench of talent, etc., without giving any precisions about when he might be inclined to leave office.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much to my special guest, Nicholas Norbrook from the Africa Report, for being my guest on Paris Live today.
Thank you.
Thank you.